I've carried a lot of secrets through my life, but this one is the story I think about the most. A few years ago, I worked as a freelance video editor. Nothing glamorous, mostly wedding videos, local business ads, and the occasional social media campaign. The job paid enough to keep the lights on, but barely. By then I was drowning in debt, angry at myself, and convinced that everyone else had somehow figured out life while I was stuck treading water. The crime I'm about to talk about started with a simple realization: people trust video evidence far more than they should. If a person sees footage with their own eyes, they assume it's real. They assume cameras are objective. They assume recordings tell the truth. I knew better. Years of editing had taught me how easily reality could be manipulated. A cut here. A missing second there. A change in timing, perspective, or context. Most people never notice. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind for a long time. Then I met Eric. Eric owned a small electronics warehouse and hired me to create promotional content for his business. He was successful, confident, and the type of guy who made sure everyone knew it. At first we got along well enough. Over time, though, I learned he wasn't nearly as honest as he appeared. He underpaid contractors, delayed invoices, and always had an excuse whenever someone demanded money he owed them. Including me. By the time this story begins, Eric owed me nearly 6 months of unpaid work. Every conversation ended the same way. "Next week, William. Accounting is working on it. Just be patient." Meanwhile, collection notices were showing up in my mailbox. I wish I could say what happened next was some grand plan for justice. It wasn't. It started as resentment. Then it became obsession. And eventually it became a crime. The idea first entered my head late one night, while I was reviewing security footage for a completely unrelated client. I remember staring at the screen and thinking, what if the footage wasn't real? Not obviously fake. Not some movie-style special effect. Just convincing enough. Convincing enough that nobody would question it. That thought should have scared me. Instead, it excited me. That was the moment everything started. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility. At first, it was just a fantasy I entertained while trying to fall asleep. I'd imagine Eric finally facing consequences for the way he treated people. Then I'd remind myself that fantasies and actions are two very different things. The problem was that I had skills most people didn't. I knew how surveillance systems worked. I knew how footage was stored, exported, compressed, and reviewed. More importantly, I knew how little attention people paid to details once they believed a video was authentic. For weeks, I convinced myself I was only researching. I watched tutorials, studied different camera models, and looked at examples of altered footage online. Every bit of knowledge made the idea feel less impossible. At the same time, my financial situation kept getting worse. Creditors called daily. My savings disappeared. Eventually, my frustration stopped being about money alone. I wanted control. I wanted Eric to feel vulnerable for once. And without fully admitting it to myself, I started planning something far beyond revenge fantasies. Once I crossed the line from imagining to planning, everything became strangely methodical. I told myself I wasn't committing a crime yet. I was only gathering information. Looking back, that was the first lie I used to justify what I was doing. Eric's warehouse had a fairly standard security system. During previous projects, I'd spent enough time there to notice where cameras were positioned and which areas had blind spots. I also knew that Eric rarely reviewed recordings himself. That responsibility usually fell to an overworked manager who trusted the system more than his own memory. Over several weeks, I found reasons to visit the warehouse. Sometimes I delivered files. Sometimes I dropped by to discuss invoices. Every visit allowed me to observe a little more. I kept notes on my phone. Camera angles. Recording schedules. Employee routines. Loading dock activity. Nothing illegal on its own. Just details. Yet every note made the plan feel more real. The frightening part wasn't how difficult the preparation was. The frightening part was how natural it started to feel. The next step was creating the footage itself. People hear fake video and immediately think of advanced technology, but the truth is often much simpler. Most convincing deceptions don't rely on spectacular effects. They rely on people seeing exactly what they expect to see. I spent evenings assembling pieces of ordinary footage I had collected during legitimate work at the warehouse months earlier. Forklifts moving through aisles. Employees carrying boxes. Security cameras capturing grainy, low-quality images. The poor quality actually helped. Imperfections hide inconsistencies. I carefully edited clips together, adjusting timestamps and camera transitions until everything appeared seamless. The goal wasn't to create a masterpiece. The goal was to create something nobody would question. Even while working, I felt a constant knot in my stomach. Sometimes I'd close the project and promise myself I was finished. Then the next day I'd reopen it. Each revision made the fabrication more believable. Each improvement pushed me further from the person I thought I was. Yet the closer I got to finishing, the harder it became to stop. By then, I was committed, whether I admitted it or not. The finished video sat on my computer for nearly a week before I did anything with it. Every day I told myself to delete it. Every day I found another reason not to. The footage appeared to show expensive inventory being removed from the warehouse after hours by someone who wasn't authorized to be there. It was subtle enough to seem genuine and suspicious enough to trigger an investigation. My objective wasn't to steal anything myself. I wanted chaos. I wanted Eric dealing with accusations, insurance claims, and uncomfortable questions. At the time, that felt justified. The hardest part was delivering the footage without drawing attention to myself. I created anonymous accounts, routed messages through public networks, and sent copies to several people connected to the business. The video arrived with a short note claiming that an employee had discovered evidence of theft and was afraid to come forward. Then I waited. Waiting was worse than planning. Every notification on my phone made my heart race. Every unknown number calling me felt dangerous. For the first time, the crime existed outside my head. There was no taking it back now. The fallout started faster than I expected. Less than 2 days after sending the footage, rumors began circulating around the warehouse. A former coworker texted me asking whether I'd heard about an internal investigation. I pretended I knew nothing. Inside, my pulse was pounding. The video had worked. Managers were reviewing records. Employees were being questioned. Nobody seemed to doubt the footage itself. They argued about motives, suspects, and missing inventory, but not about whether the recording was real. That terrified me more than I anticipated. I had expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Then things became worse. The suspicion didn't focus on Eric. It focused on a warehouse supervisor named Daniel. Daniel had always treated me fairly. We weren't close friends, but he was one of the few people there who had shown me respect. Unfortunately, the fabricated timeline happened to place him near the area shown in the footage. Hearing his name connected to the investigation made my stomach drop. For the first time, I realized that once a lie starts moving, you don't get to decide where it goes. The next week was one of the most stressful periods of my life. Daniel became the center of attention. People noticed that he had access to the areas shown in the footage. They noticed that he occasionally worked late. Every ordinary detail suddenly looked suspicious when viewed through the lens of the video I had created. I remember sitting in a coffee shop when a former employee called me. "Daniel might get fired," he said. The words hit me like a punch. Until then, the situation had felt abstract. It was emails, rumors, and meetings happening somewhere else. Now there was an actual person facing real consequences. I considered confessing. More than once, I opened a blank message and stared at the screen, trying to figure out what I could possibly say. But fear always won. If I admitted what I'd done, everything would collapse on me. So instead I stayed silent. That silence became its own burden. Every new update made me feel worse. Yet I kept convincing myself that the investigation would eventually uncover the truth. It didn't. The fake footage remained the strongest piece of evidence anyone had. At that point, I stopped worrying about getting caught and started worrying about what my lie was doing to other people. Daniel hadn't been fired yet, but he was under intense scrutiny. Coworkers avoided him. Management watched him closely. From what I heard, he spent most of his time trying to prove he hadn't done anything wrong. The guilt was becoming impossible to ignore. Ironically, my response was to interfere even more. I anonymously sent another message to the company, suggesting that investigators should examine a different period of footage and review inventory records more carefully. My goal was to redirect attention away from Daniel without revealing my involvement. Instead, the message created confusion. Some people interpreted it as a tip from the supposed whistleblower. Others saw it as an attempt to protect the guilty party. The investigation grew larger. More interviews. More accusations. More suspicion. I had convinced myself I could steer events from behind the scenes, but I was learning a hard lesson. Once deception takes on a life of its own, control becomes an illusion. And things were about to get much worse. A month after the footage surfaced, I learned something that nearly made me panic. The company had hired an outside forensic analyst to review the security recordings. Until then, most of the investigation had been handled internally. Now someone with actual expertise was examining the evidence frame by frame. The moment I heard that, I knew I was in trouble. Not because the analyst knew it was fake yet, but because professionals look for things ordinary people never notice. Compression patterns. Timestamp inconsistencies. Minor visual anomalies. Details I had spent weeks trying to hide. For days, I barely slept. Every email notification made me jump. Every knock at my apartment door sent my imagination racing. Then rumors began circulating that the analyst had found irregularities in the footage. Nobody seemed certain what that meant. But I knew. The foundation of the entire investigation was starting to crack. Oddly enough, the possibility of exposure brought a strange sense of relief. For weeks I had been carrying the weight of the lie alone. Now the truth was beginning to push its way to the surface, whether I wanted it to or not. The analyst's findings changed everything. What had once been treated as unquestionable evidence suddenly became the subject of debate. Managers who had confidently pointed to the video now seemed unsure. Meetings were held. Reports were reviewed. People started asking whether the footage had been manipulated. For the first time, Daniel wasn't the one being questioned. The video was. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt trapped. The more investigators examined the footage, the greater the chance they would eventually trace its origin. I had taken precautions, but no precaution felt sufficient anymore. Every decision I had made during preparation replayed endlessly in my mind. Did I leave a clue somewhere? Did I overlook a detail? Had anyone connected me to the warehouse footage used in the edit? Meanwhile, Eric was furious. According to people I knew, he blamed everyone around him. Employees, managers, contractors, nobody escaped his suspicion. Watching the chaos unfold was surreal. The crime I'd committed to hurt one person had spread far beyond its original target. And I was beginning to understand that consequences don't stop where you intend them to. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. A representative from the company wanted to speak with me about some old video projects I'd completed for the warehouse. The request sounded routine, but the moment I hung up, I knew exactly why they were contacting me. My hands were shaking before the meeting even started. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different. Polite but cautious. They asked questions about archived footage, editing software, and my previous access to security recordings. None of the questions directly accused me of anything, yet every one felt aimed in my direction. I answered carefully. Technically, I wasn't lying about most things. That didn't make me feel any better. The worst moment came when they showed me a still frame from the fake video and asked whether anything looked unusual. For a second, I thought I was finished. I forced myself to study the image and casually point out a few harmless technical observations. They thanked me and ended the meeting. I walked out free. But for the first time, I genuinely believed they might be getting close. After that meeting, my confidence completely disappeared. For weeks, I'd been operating under the assumption that investigators were looking at a puzzle with missing pieces. Now it felt like they had most of the picture and were simply trying to confirm what they already suspected. Everyday life became exhausting. I'd wake up expecting a phone call from the police. I'd check my email dozens of times a day. Whenever someone knocked on my apartment door unexpectedly, my heart would immediately start racing. The stress followed me everywhere. Ironically, Daniel's situation was improving. The forensic review had weakened the case against him, and management was slowly backing away from earlier accusations. Hearing that should have made me happy. Instead, it deepened my guilt. His reputation had already been damaged. People had doubted him. People had talked about him. And all of it traced back to something I created. The investigation eventually concluded that the footage could not be considered reliable evidence. Officially, nobody knew who altered it. Unofficially, I suspected that several people had begun connecting the dots. I just couldn't prove it. And neither could they. When the investigation finally wound down, I expected relief. Instead, I was left with something heavier. Silence. No arrests were made. No public accusations followed. The company quietly moved on from the incident after determining that the footage couldn't be trusted. Employees returned to their routines, and business gradually resumed. From the outside, the story seemed finished. For me, it had barely begun. Every time I saw an article about digital manipulation or misinformation, I thought about what I'd done. Every discussion about evidence and trust felt personal. The strange thing was that nobody treated me differently. Friends still called. Clients still hired me. People still assumed I was the same person I'd always been. That was the part that bothered me most. They were judging me based on what they knew, while I was judging myself based on what I had hidden. Keeping the secret became its own punishment. Years passed, but I never completely stopped thinking about Daniel, Eric, or the chain of events that followed my decision. The crime was over. The consequences weren't out. A few years later, I unexpectedly ran into Daniel at a local event. The moment I saw him, every memory came rushing back. He recognized me immediately and walked over with a smile. We talked for a few minutes about work, mutual acquaintances, and how much had changed since the warehouse days. Then he mentioned the investigation. Not in an angry way. Not even in a bitter way. Just as one of those strange experiences people carry with them. He told me how stressful that period had been. How difficult it was to sit through interviews and watch coworkers quietly question his integrity. He said the experience had damaged his trust in people for a long time. I stood there listening, knowing that I was the reason. Part of me wanted to confess right then. I imagined telling him everything. But I didn't. Fear still had a hold on me. When we said goodbye, he wished me well and walked away. I remember standing there afterward, realizing that escaping legal consequences doesn't mean escaping responsibility. Sometimes the hardest judgment comes from your own conscience. So that's the story. I was never arrested. I was never formally identified as the person behind the fabricated footage. As far as official records are concerned, the source of the manipulation remains unknown. But I don't consider that getting away with it. For a long time, I told myself that my actions were justified because Eric had treated people badly and owed me money. That excuse helped me ignore what I was really doing. The truth is that anger doesn't give you the right to manufacture evidence. Resentment doesn't make deception acceptable. And once false information enters the world, you lose control over where it goes and who it hurts. The person most affected wasn't even the person I intended to target. It was Daniel. If there's any lesson here, it's this: don't mistake technical ability for wisdom. Just because you can manipulate something doesn't mean you should. Video, photos, recordings, none of them are automatically the truth. And if you're tempted to solve a problem through deception, understand that the consequences may follow you long after everyone else has moved on.